Okay, so let's focus on the chain. And what I had to do was track down a series of pieces that were straighter than the others within this area. So in this case, it was the ones that were mostly upright in this area, but as you can see, they're kind of like all janky and squished in together. And I could try, and I have used these before, but they're just offset. And then when I go to rotate them, I don't know, there's something weird happens, and it's just not a good thing. So um, these are probably the pieces I would focus on the most if I were going to use any. So see here, I will select. These are probably the best ones I could use. So I'll select this. Okay. Shift duplicate, separate selection, hide this. I'm going to set origin to geometry, rotate this, Control A to apply rotation and scale. And then I'm going to convert this curve or this mesh to a curve, and then apply rotation and scale as well. Then I'm going to add a transformation. Actually, no, it's not right. Then I'm going to go into the modifier tab, add an array. I'm going to set this to 55 for now and bring it down. And then I'm going to add a curve, which will be the one we just created. I'm going to add a curve. And I just bring it out. Now the chain links are kind of small, so I'm going to scale them up. And then bring the count down. And if we go in here and I just hit scale, I can kind of match this up. That seems okay. And I'm going to parent the chain to the curve. And for now, I'm going to parent the curve to the frame. But I may change because I want it to rotate at a very specific very specific way, and I'll probably need like an empty object or a bone or something like that in order to get that moving. So that will be subject to change. So keep that in mind, and then select the chain, go into the constraint transformation. I'm going to select the main control, extrapolate, local to local, map from. I'm going to set to -1 to 1, and map 2 will be the same thing, -1 to 1 on the x-axis. And move our chain. That looks good. Now, of course, I need a little bit more work to be done on this scaling, but I just wanted to get it working. So at least with that, I can deal with, some minor fixes here and there. So in this case, I just need to scale it a little bit. So I'm just going to scale it up and then move it back. Not too much. Okay. I'm just going to take a look here. Line that up there. And then go in the back and then do the same thing. So I'll just select here and then go to proportional editing. And then I'm just going to just pull that over. Seems okay. And I'll test that out. Hopefully nothing bad. Fantastic, looks good. All right, so no major issues. There is some stretching. I'm not going to worry too much about that. It's a functioning chain. There are ways to get around that. But for the purposes of this video, we just want it to function. So like I could, technically I could like scale it on the X, bring it in, and then add more links. So 53 seems like a good ratio. Let me just go here and scale it back a little bit. So yeah, that seems a little better. And now we can move on to the next phase, which will be setting up the suspension. All right, let's take a look here. I'm going to hide this and this and these two, so I can get a better look at what's going on here. So the main area I want to focus on is this. I mean, we see that they're parented in a very specific way based on their pivot points. And so I'm going to go back to that piece and get a transformation constraint, which we will set to the frame. Extrapolate, local to local, map from, -1 to 1 on the Z, map to rotation, X, Z, Y, which I'm going to set to 12.3 and -12.3 max. And test that out. All right. Let's move on to the next piece. All right, so we'll set another transformation constraint, set the target as the frame, extrapolate, local to local, map from, -1 to 1 on the Z, map to rotation, X, Z, Y, -4.9 to 4.9 on the Z. Test that out. Okay. Move on to this piece now. Another transformation constraint. Set to frame as the target. Extrapolate, local to local, map from. Z-axis I will set -0.7 to 0.7 max. And map to I will set X, Z, Y. Z will be 14 to minus 14. It's not perfect, but it'll work, so long as I don't go overboard. So add another transform, set to frame, extrapolate, local to local, map from location, Z min minus 3 to max 3. Map 2, we will leave as XYZ minus 0.28 to 0.28 max. Test that out. And lastly, this piece, which controls the upper piston, I wanted to move a bit of an angle as the upper piece moves down just to kind of compensate. So I'll set a transformation. The target will be the frame. Extrapolate, local to local, map from, Z minus 3 to max 3, and map 2. X, Z, Y with the Z at 9 and minus 9 max. And test that out. It looks pretty good. We're going to select the chain curve and this second suspension piece here, Control P to parent, and test it out. Because what we want is for the chain to also follow the suspension so that it doesn't look weird when the rear wheel rises and falls. Yeah, and if I don't go overboard, then it should be fine, like this. Nice. I'm going to select the rear wheel, cursor to selected, Shift A to add a mesh plane, and then select the front wheel, Shift S cursor to selected, Shift A to add a mesh plane, and then we'll select them both and move them down. These will act as our suspension controllers in how the wheels interact with the ground. So I'm just going to go to the Object tab here and turn off its visibility in the renders. Same here. And also turning off the shadow and setting it to wired for both. Next, I'm going to go into edit mode and subdivide 6 times. Back out. And looks good. At some point, I'll probably shrink these down so that the amount of coverage they get will give the wheels a more realistic rise and fall. But we'll see when we get there. So next we need to do a small setup to get the wheels and suspension to interact with our new controllers. So let's move on to that now. I'm going to give this a custom name, F sus control. Select the rear one, give it a custom name, R sus control. As we can see, if I select the controller, they're not following along with the bike. So I'll select them both, then shift select the frame, Control P to parent to the object, and test it out. Now, if I rotate on the z-axis, you can see they follow along, and this is exactly what we want, especially for when you happen to have the bike turning a certain way and you still want the wheels to be responsive to the surface that it happens to be in contact with at that set moment. And now select the front lower suspension and transform constraint, which we will set to the F-sus control. Extrapolate, local to local, map from. On the Z, I will set 3 to -3. Map to, we'll leave as XYZ and set 2 to -1.9 max. Good. And I'll save. And again, imagine what my Fallout saves are like. Now we'll move on to this one. We'll set a transformation constraint, RSS control, extrapolate, local to local. On map from, for the Z, I will set 3 to -3 max, and map to, on the Z, I will set 2 to -1.9 max. And test it out. And 2, I'm starting with -1.9, but after a bit of testing, I'm going to go with -2.2 instead. And test that out. Looks pretty good so long as you don't go overboard. So it's about limits. I mean, imagine the structure of the bike is limited in its design anyway, so there's only so far everything's going to rise and fall. I feel like maybe the suspension is a bit too much coming from the RSS controls. So on the map from Z, I'm going to set this to 4 and -4 and test that out. Yeah, that's a little more subtle. All right, so now I'm just going to scale these down so that when they're in contact with the surface, we get a more realistic movement from the wheels and overall suspension. Whereas if they were larger, then those movements would be either too extreme or more subtle. So having this set just right, we should get some good results. And they're just about the width of the tire, and I think that's good coverage for what's around it. So I'm going to shift data, add a landscape. Be sure that you have the Ant Landscape tool enabled. And in the operator presets, I'm going to go to dunes. Set the X subdivisions to 256 and the Y 256. Mesh size 64 by 32. Then I'm going to scroll down here. For the noise size, I'm going to start with 2. And I'm going to mess with the height settings here. Maybe I'll bring the noise size down. Ooh, no. Definitely up. Right, there we go. So yeah, I think this is going to be good. It's just enough ground surface to be a challenge for the wheels. And next step, we're going to go to the object constraints and select a shrink wrap and set for the landscape to be our target. And then in the mode, I will set project. And that's it. We do the same for the rear wheel. Object constraint, shrink wrap. Target is the landscape. Mode project. And you can see it's going through the surface a little bit there. I'm just going to ignore that because it's sand, so, you know, whatever. But yeah, I think that looks good. You can tweak it if you need to. And now I'll set the camera so we can get a good look at what's going on here. Move it back a little. Move it down, back a little more. There we go. And we will just parent our camera to the main controller. I'm just going to modify the edges of our terrain. So I'm going to Alt left click to select one end, move to the other side, Alt left click to move in and select the other side. Then I'm going to E to extrude and scale on the X axis, which gives me this. And I'm going to grab on the X and move the terrain forward so that we basically have a starting point now. And select the main controller, go into top view mode, I to set its location, then jump to the last frame on the timeline, and I to location. Jump back, and let's play. Nice. Yeah, I think that looks good. Got some movement. It's not too much. It's just enough based on how the surface is set up. And of course, the bike can withstand rugged terrain, but you know, these are just early default settings, so feel free to tweak those as you see fit. All right, so now we're going to focus on the spring suspension. As I mentioned that we are going to get the best of both worlds. I'm going to select this lower suspension section, Shift S cursor to selected. And before I do anything, I'm going to save, add an armature. We'll select this piece here, Shift S cursor to selected. Select the bone, go into edit mode, select the top, Shift S, selection to cursor. We'll back out. Then hide these two pieces. Be sure to parent this armature to the frame. Then I need to go find the other suspension, which, oh, and I found my chain, so I'm just going to follow this OG chain and move on. There we are. So select this. And I need its origin to be at the bottom here. So I'm going to select this piece here, Shift S, cursor to selected. Next, I will just rotate this a little bit and scale it down to about here. So next thing I'm going to do is just convert any tries to quads, which I probably already did in the beginning, but out of habit. Then I'm going to go into face mode and loop select these parts to separate them. And as you can see, I forgot I was in proportional editing mode, so turn that off, and now I have this one piece. So I will P to separate selection and do the same for this lower area here. There's actually a center piece there. And of course the bottom pieces, which I also need. Cool, so we'll just separate that as well. And now we should just have the spring by itself. Select everything and just rotate it to be upright just a little bit, as we always do with setting up these spring suspensions. So I'm just rotating it 1.05 here and applying rotation, and then rotating it back minus 1.05. So now everything is upright. And sharing the same Z location as well. But looking at these, their origins are a bit offset. And so what I needed to do was unhide my pieces so that I could utilize the origin for this piece. Shift S, cursor to selected. Go ahead and hide that. Select this top piece here and give it a new origin, which will be our 3D cursor. Great. So top and bottom pieces are good. Now we can focus on the spring here. And now I just need to be able to see the armature more. So I'm going to go to its settings and in viewport display, I'm going to set to in front. And I'll go ahead and save. Now I'm going to go into edit mode and subdivide. In this case, it will be 6 times, but your subdivisions may vary depending on the type of spring. So you could go, it could be anywhere from 5 to 7 for sure, or more. It just depends on how complex you want or how much work you want to do. So just keep that in mind. So let's take a closer look. In this case, we're only separating the middle 3, which leaves 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom. And so on either end, they're basically acting as anchor points, and that gives the middle 3 the freedom to move around, but still have some level of constraint within the armature hierarchy. So now that those 3 are disconnected, I'm going to back out of pose mode and next focus on the spring, which I will set the origin to geometry. Then we'll select the spring and then the armature, Control P with automatic weights. Let's test that out. Go into pose mode. Nice. And as you can see, it's not perfect. If I were to have added more subdivisions, I could have gotten more movement, but just due to it being a tutorial, I wanted to keep things light and simple. But I will say it could be a little bit smaller. So what I will do is go out of back into object mode and select the spring and just scale it down a little bit. And normally I don't recommend scaling on the Z-axis, but in this case, I just, it was just such a small amount that it's not nearly noticeable. It's not the focal point of the bike, so it's only the focal point in this moment. But yeah, I think that looks a little better, and the movement seems a little bit more realistic as well. So now I can move into setting the object constraints. So start with this first one, transformation. We will set to the sus control, extrapolate, local to local, a map from, location, on Z, map from on location, I would set -20 to 20 max, map to, we'll set X, Z, Y with Z -3 to max 3. We'll select the second bone here, transformation, RSUS, extrapolate, local to local, map from, Z -20 to 20 max, map to, XZY, -3 to 3 max. Next bone, transformation, RSUS, extrapolate, local to local, map from, Z -20 to 20 max, map to, XZY, -3 to 3 max. And that should do it. So let's go ahead and go back to object mode, the RSS control, test it out, see how well it squashes and stretches. Yeah, that looks pretty good. It'll do. So I'm going to select this lower piece here and parent it to the frame. All right, so then we're going to do the same as our previous piston suspension piece. So we'll add an object constraint transform. Set our target to be the frame. Extrapolate, local to local. Map from on the Z, I will set -3 to 3 max. Map 2 on the Z axis, I will set -0.28 to 0.28 max. And similarly to the lower piston piece, object constraint transform, target frame, extrapolate, local to local, map from, on the Z, -3 to 3 max. Map 2, X, Z, Y, and set to rotation. And on the Z, 9 to -9 max. And we should be good to go. Go back to camera view and test that out. Let's take a look here. Pretty subtle. It's pretty subtle. I kind of have to slow it down just to see it. So I'm going to go frame by frame and take a look at what kind of squash and stretch we get. Yeah, there we go. You can see it better under this. And I can see it's kind of going up a little too far, but I'm just going to ignore that. It's no worries. You can't really tell from far away, so. So I hope you found this tutorial useful. It was an interesting but definitely needed setup, and I appreciate all of your views. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.